recognized that there should be gay rights, that people ought not to be discriminated against on the basis of sexual orientation, and if they were, they ought to have remedies.
You know, it's a rare experience, particularly 7 years into your legal career, that you get the case of a lifetime. These 13 softball players that we represented had received a letter on June 1, 1992, when they had gone home for summer break, telling them that their softball program had been dropped. They would still have their scholarships for a year, academically, but no softball program. I believe in the theory that how you do things can lead to lawsuits, and this would be a perfect example. So the softball program was reinstated, and it was one of the 3 cases at that time that really established what the standards would be under Title IX, and they have not been challenged today, successfully anyway.
I never had causes. As an undergraduate, as a law school student, as practicing, I never had causes. But when I started to practice, and the one thing I feel that I really did for women in Weld County, I'm not doing it as much now as I should. One thing, anyone that came to me as a woman, I did quite a bit of divorce, and the first thing they had to do was to take the GED, and the second thing they had to do was to register to vote.
I actually think that the traditional traits of the female personality are very well suited to the law and to the bench.
But I think what I bring to that practice is being an African American woman, is being the child of sharecroppers, and the empathy that I have.
The whole concept of equal and fair treatment of people, social justice issues, has been a really strong influence in my life, and most recently the way I've gotten into it has been in the restorative justice movement.
I think that the movement in mediation, alternative dispute resolution, collaborative law, is a function of the fact that there are so many women in the profession who would prefer to reach a resolution other than by duking it out in court.
We do some things that make no sense whatsoever in the law. And it's based on tradition, and it's based on control, keeping control in lawyers' hands. And it's often not good for litigants, can be literally abusive of witnesses, and it's extraordinarily inefficient. And in the kinds of cases that I did, which a lot of employment law and a lot of domestic relations, it can destroy any possibility of a future relationship between the parties.
Our way of dealing with problems is to try to reach a win-win solution. I think that is a more feminine trait than a masculine trait.
We're doing a pilot project called Simplified Dissolution, or Divorce with Dignity. And it was piloted in the year 2000 in El Paso, Arapahoe, and Denver County. In the first 200 cases we did in Denver, there were only 2 contested cases.
You know, it's the social scientist part of me. We have now, moved to allowing, in civil cases, jurors to talk to each other prior to deliberation. That's a result of a pilot that we did.
Its purpose was and continues to be to try to afford to jurors a more important role in the system.
But that was the mores. That was the social thing. That was the thinking of the day. And if a man beat up on his wife, they didn't say how terrible, how dreadful. They said, what did she do? That was the knee-jerk response to domestic violence in those days.
We have to avoid jurogenic harm, which is the system causing harm to the families and to the kids.
But at least the judicial system is not making more problems. It has stopped being part of the problem, and it has started to be part of the solution.
And I think we have had an enormous impact in the legal profession of a very positive nature. And I really do believe that you can trace it back to the point at which the numbers of women in the profession reached a critical mass.
We have a very conservative profession. unlike perhaps business or some other areas where the assumption is that you need to change and that some new idea ought to be explored, the reaction that I have found in general is, well, if it's not broke, why fix it?
You know, the caseload in county court is crushing. It really is. And I think it's so important because if I could restructure the salaries, I would pay county judges the most. And I would pay divorce judges the next most. And the reason I say that is because most people who encounter the legal system, the justice system at all, do so either in traffic court or in divorce court. And if they are treated well and fairly there, they come away with a good idea of how the system is working. I mean, they're not going to see how a judge performs when it's AT&T versus IBM.
And I know we have a real crisis, I think, with the how to represent the poor and the indigent people in civil cases. There's just really not enough availability of legal services for that. It's, one of the things that's been a tremendous change for the courts have been the number of people coming to court without attorneys.
They must make their courtrooms open to people who appear pro se. And it's not because they want to be pro se. It's because they can't afford a lawyer.
We are all in this together. This is one legal community. The big firms and the small firms and everyone in between are part of the picture. And we're all responsible for the delivery of legal services to the underserved of our community. Remember that oath we took?
We as lawyers are given some special knowledge that we do need to use wisely. We shouldn't use it necessarily just for our own personal goals.
There was no way I could ever say this is hard because I kept thinking, what happens to the single mom who makes $16,000 a year? What does she do?
Given that the legislature has tried for a number of years to cut back on the types of benefits that people get under workers' compensation insurance, and that so many people are affected, and the payouts for those claims are so small for people who won't ever be able to work again in their lives.
Sometimes guideline sentencing is, you know, you look to see what the crime is, how much did the drugs weigh, what is the record of the defendant, and then you put it all in the computer and it comes out with a number. Well, it shouldn't really be like that. There should be differences.
I think we have an obligation to not become lulled into a sense of security because we have arrived.
I'm trying to get more involved now with some nonprofit organizations, and that's where I would love to leave my mark, not necessarily you know, for some well-drafted document, but instead for making some changes in the community.
I think women, to a great extent, have and will continue to humanize the law.